Hi, good to see you.
Mark Chandler has been running this addiction recovery home in Virginia for the last 9 years. So what sort of cases are coming through your door? What stage of their addiction or their recovery are they typically at?
Well, generally speaking, you're at a pretty low point. You've pretty well lost it all if you're going to come here.
The home originally opened to men who were struggling with alcohol, but over the time you've been here, you've seen an increase in other addictions, in particular to painkillers.
The men's home started to accept people who are addicted to opiates. Then opioids hit, and that is when we started to see a very sharp increase. By the time they get here, they have probably not been on a prescription drug for a while. They have gone out and their problem is now heroin, heroin and fentanyl. So a lot of the time, that's what we see.
This is a meeting on opioid and the tremendous effect that's taken place over the last little period of time.
2 years after President Trump declared the opioid crisis a health emergency, the drugs are still killing more than 130 people in the US every day. Opioid-related deaths were 6 times higher in 2017 than 1999, with the epidemic now affecting an even wider demographic.
The opioid epidemic in the U.S. is ravaging our younger population, and it is really making a dent in life expectancy. You go to certain parts of the United States, the primary source of organs for transplant is young people who overdose. And that never was true in the United States until 5, 7, 10 years ago.
Drug companies have been accused of fueling the crisis, flooding communities with opioids, using aggressive marketing and applying poor controls. 5 major drug firms, including Teva and Johnson & Johnson, have offered settlements of nearly $50 billion to the hardest-hit communities. But states are pushing back, demanding better terms for a national epidemic that some estimates say could have already cost the economy over $1 trillion. Professor Kaplan is one of many calling out America's powerful pharmaceutical industry to take responsibility.
Clearly, this drug explosion, which isn't taking place to the same degree anywhere else, I think it's taking place here in part because drug companies marketed heavily here. This was the place they could make the most money because prices were out of control.
Legal fights and settlement battles are stacking up for 2020 as America tries to understand how the epidemic took hold and how it can attempt to recover. Kevin McAleese, TRT World, Alexandria, Virginia.
And for more on this, Nicholas Terry joins us from Indianapolis. He's a director of Indiana University's Center for Law and Health. Welcome back to the program, Nicholas. Now, 2019 really was the year that the opioid crisis made international headlines. What, in your view, was the most significant development to come out of the whole saga this year?
I think there were 3 sort of interlinked developments. First, and the big headlines that we've discussed here before, the state of Oklahoma settlements with Purdue Pharma and Teva, followed by the trial and verdict against Johnson & Johnson. Second, I'd point to the continued failure of the federal court in Cleveland to orchestrate a global settlement and get this behind us and get the monies to people who need it. And third, and most recently, Purdue Pharma, the company, opting for bankruptcy protection, what we call in the United States Chapter 11 reorganization.
Let's look more into Purdue Pharma because that company makes the opioid OxyContin, which really has emerged as public enemy #1 in this opioid crisis. Remind us what role Purdue played in all this and how culpable you think they are.
Well, the company has been in the legal crosshairs for more than a decade. For example, in 2007, the company and some of its executives pleaded guilty to charges that they misled regulators, doctors, and patients about OxyContin's risk of addiction and its potential to be abused. They paid a fine of $600 million. Before, allegedly, they continued with business as usual. I guess what changed in 2019 was that the plaintiffs, states, and local governments started to raise questions about the Sackler family that controlled Purdue. And that started with allegations in a complaint filed by the Massachusetts Attorney General about the ways the Sacklers drove the company's strategy during the overdose epidemic and the amount of money they were extracting from the company.
Yes, let's look at the Sackler family, which owns Purdue Pharma, as you mentioned. They've argued that they were merely passive board members of the company who approved routine management decisions and requests and were not actively involved in the marketing of OxyContin. Do you believe them?
Well, the simple answer is we don't know. We do have depositions under oath from the Oklahoma case, and we have allegations from the Massachusetts complaint suggesting far more direct involvement of certain family members. Equally, there have been reports that the family itself is no longer acting as a single unit, but has fragmented with different interests. As part of its bankruptcy proceedings, of course, Purdue, the company, has had to distance itself from the Sackler family. And as a result is pursuing various audits of the monies paid to the family members and so on. And some of those details are now leaking out, such as the family reportedly withdrawing almost $11 billion from the company over the past decade.
Can we look at the other significant development that you mentioned, and the thousands of lawsuits that have emerged, not just from individuals, but from authorities as well. So state and local governments in Ohio filed more than 2,600 lawsuits against painkiller manufacturers, some of whom have chosen to settle those cases. Do you think other states will follow suit? And I guess more broadly, how successful is that strategy?
Well, there are about 2,600 lawsuits, as you say, filed against manufacturers, distributors by primarily local communities, counties, cities from all over the United States, and they're filed in federal district court in Cleveland. First of all, I think everybody has hit the pause button, right? Everyone is waiting for the Purdue bankruptcy to be resolved, because that has literally frozen litigation against Purdue and, in practical terms, pretty much against everybody else. Those proceedings, as they emerge from bankruptcy and get settled, will also likely flush out what monies the Sackler family have that can be captured in litigation.
Okay, Nicholas Terry, thank you so much for giving us your latest analysis.